So, in other words, these three themes, they are going to set the stage for everything else that we read in the Bible. In other words, we need to, as we go through all the stories in the Bible, we need to constantly come back to the garden as an anchor point for trying to understand the scriptures. Okay? These three themes set the stage for the rest of everything we read in the Bible. Now, you guys have heard it said before that Adonai tells the end from the beginning, right? The end from the beginning, a little timeline that always starts over there and goes over there, right? He tells the end from the beginning. And that's what's happening here. And so what I want you to do is I want you to concentrate on these three themes, that there's going to be the enmity of the seed, right? The seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. The woman is going to have difficulty in labor, in childbirth, and that the ground is cursed. And we're going to see how these three themes continue to come up over and over again in everything that we read about, okay? So we already looked at that. That was Genesis 3:15. It talks about the enemy of the seed, the difficulty in childbirth, and in Genesis 3:16. And then in Genesis 3:17 through 19, it talks about how the ground was cursed. Now watch how these themes come up when Adonai made a promise, when he made a promise to Abraham. Okay? He made a promise. All right, so in Genesis 13:14 through 16, and in Genesis 17:8, Adonai said something along these lines. Also, I give to you and your descendants after you the land in which you are a stranger, all the land of Canaan as an everlasting possession. Okay? I'm going to give you what did he say he was going to give them? Land, right? Remember, in Genesis, one of the themes was the ground is going to be cursed. One of the major promises that Adonai gives to Abraham and his descendants is, I'm going to give you a special land, right? Now, to bring it even closer to what happened in the garden, remember what Adonai said. He said, cursed is the ground because of you. Thorns and thistles shall it bring up for you, right? And so in other words, he said, by the sweat of your brow, you're going to eat from the ground. Well, what happened to that ground when Israel, Adonai promised Israel what? When I bring you into this land, if you serve me, what was that land? How was that land going to respond to them? It was going to produce despite the curse, right? In other words, the children of Israel, the land was going to respond to them in such a way that the curse would basically no longer be on the land. Remember what he said? He said during the year of Jubilee that even though you wouldn't be able to sow any crops, you would get 3 years worth of harvest, right? You didn't even have to sow anything. You didn't have to labor to sow. That is the exact opposite of of the curse that Adonai pronounced on the ground. So in other words, what I'm saying to you is that when Adonai said to Adam and Eve, cursed is the ground because of you, that became one of the major themes that we are to view the rest of the Bible through and see how it comes up over and over again. So one of the main promises that Adonai gave to Abraham was that your descendants will inherit this special land. And then later on, when the Torah was given, we found out that, hey, you know what? If you obey Adonai, that land that he gave you, it will not fall prey to the curse. Adonai will basically remove the curse, okay? All right, what about this? He gave Abraham the promise of descendants, right? Remember he said in Genesis 17:2, and I will make my covenant between me and you, and I will multiply you exceedingly. In Genesis 17:6, he said, I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make nations of you. Well, that ties back to Genesis. Remember the second major theme was childbirth, right? That there would be labor, and that there would be labor in childbirth. In pain shall you bring forth children. It's the whole idea of bringing forth seed, bringing forth descendants. And it's going to be done with trouble. But what we see is that the second major promise that Adonai gave to the children of Israel, it relates back to what happened in the garden again, okay? So this is what I mean when I said that what we see in the book of Genesis, in Genesis 3, verses 15 through 17, those three things are recurring in how he's dealing with Abraham. Because remember, what are the two major promises that Adonai made to Abraham? I'm going to give you a special land, right? And I'm going to multiply your descendants, right? Now, and we can connect that back to the curse on the ground. We can connect that back to Eve having trouble in childbirth. And we're going to see this play out throughout the scriptures. Now, here's the third theme. Because remember, the other theme was enmity between the seed, right? There's going to be enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. Now, in Genesis 22, after the binding of Isaac, in verse 17 through 18, because Abraham obeyed Adonai, Adonai said, in blessing I will bless you, and multiplying I will multiply your descendants as the stars of heaven. And notice what he said, and your descendants shall possess the gate of their enemies, right? Now that is just a Hebrew idiom which means you, your seed, your descendants are going to have victory over their enemies. And with that comes the third theme that we saw in Genesis 3:15 through 17. So those three motifs or themes in Genesis 3:15 through 17, they become the foundational building blocks for the Abrahamic covenant and for the blessing that Adonai is going to give to his people. Okay? And so basically what's going to happen is this. Even though there was a curse that the woman would conceive and bear a child and bear children in pain, in some kind of way Adonai was going to overcome that curse, right? That's what I want you to begin to think of. Is that Adonai, he basically made three judgments against mankind. Those three judgments, pain and childbirth, and through the Abrahamic covenant, Adonai is going to overcome that. He gave them a special, he cursed the land, but through the Abrahamic covenant, the children of Israel could overcome the curse of that land. And also he said there would be enmity between the seed, and through the covenant, Adonai's seed could prevail. All right? Now, speaking of the enmity of the seed, I want you to watch and I want you to see how the enmity of the seed prophesied of in Genesis 3, it becomes the backdrop for almost every major story that we see. How about Cain versus Abel? Remember the seed, the enmity between the seed. Because you have Cain, Cain is the seed of the serpent. Now, on the one hand, when Adonai gave that declaration, when he said, I will put enmity between your seed, the seed of the woman, and the seed of the serpent, you would almost think, well, let's say, if we just think of it on the natural, it just means that, mankind is going to hate snakes. Right? And we all do hate snakes, right? Who likes snakes? Right? I knew we would have one. I knew I shouldn't have asked that. I mean, it was a great question, but I knew that I was going to have somebody, and it was Missy. But anyway, there's one in every group. All right. So, right, I mean, nobody likes snakes except for Missy. Nobody, right? So, on the one hand, if you just interpret that in the natural, it's like, okay, yeah, so people are going to hate snakes, and people do hate snakes. But that's not what Adonai was getting at, okay? What I'm not going to tell you what he was getting at right now. Some of you probably already know, but I'm going to be suspenseful. All right. But Cain and Abel is an instance of enmity between the seed, let me tell you. Okay? All right, how about this? How about Ham and Shem? Right? Shem's descendants became who? Come on now. You guys shouldn't have to think about this. Shem's descendants became Israel. All right. You guys are scaring me out there. You guys aren't sleeping on me, are you? I'm going to have to start shouting and jumping around up here. You guys want to see some good preaching? I can do it. I remember, well, I won't go there. I remember one time, Tina and I, this is back in like the 80s or something, and we were home in Chicago, and it was like a Sunday or something. It was at my mother's house, and there was black preacher on, and he had this guy who would read a verse, so it would go something like this. It would go something like this. Sorry about this aside, but I gotta wake you guys up. All right, so the preacher would be one spot, and the guy with the book, he'd be over there. And so the preacher would say, read! That was read. And the guy would say, and it came to pass in those days that a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be arrested. All right, now, let me tell you what that means. Now, before the Savior came into the world, let me tell you now, he was prophesied that in the name of the Lord that he would bring the seed into the world. Read! And then the guy would read the next verse. And then as he reads the verse, he says, all right, now, what this is telling you is that God can do everything, anything that you want. He can do it before you even think about it or you ask about it. Read! All right? You guys awake? Okay. All right. I can do that. Yeah, I can do that. All right. Ham versus Shem. That's an example of enmity of the seed because Shem's descendants became Israel. And who did Ham's descendants become? Canaan. Right? And when Israel went to conquer the land, who did they have to defeat? The Canaanites. And remember what God told Abraham, your seed will possess the gate of their enemies, right? All right. How about this? Jacob versus Esau. This struggle between these two brothers in the womb, it goes back to when Adonai said that there's going to be enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. Okay? How about Jacob's family versus the Canaanites? We saw that. Pharaoh versus Moses. How about Israel versus all of the nations? Okay? How about Haman trying to come after the children of Israel? It all goes back to the enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. It wasn't just talking about the physical descendants of women, of people versus snakes. Okay? That's not what it was talking about. How about Hitler? When Hitler tried to exterminate the Jewish nation, that was an example of the enmity between the seed. It was an example of the enmity between the seed. The enemy's plan is to use his seed. See, Satan wants to use his seed to destroy the seed of the woman. Now, turn with me over to Revelation chapter 12. And we're going to see, now remember how I talk about chiastic structures, right? How when you look at the beginning, you'll have a story, and the themes at the beginning of the story are going to repeat at the end of the story, right? Now I'm going to show you. Now I don't think the Bible, the whole thing, is one big chiastic structure. But watch this. Where's the first time that we hear about the enmity between the seed of the woman and the serpent? It's at the beginning, right? When's the last time we hear about the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent? At the end in Revelation chapter 12, right? So we're going to read Revelation chapter 12, and we're going to read some verses here. And once we read these verses, we're going to understand what Adonai meant by when he said, I shall put enmity between your seed and her seed. He was speaking spiritually, and here is where we can see that, okay? There's chapter 1. Now there was a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, and under her head, and on her head, a garland of 12 stars. And she, being with child, cried out in labor and in pain to give birth. What did we say the other theme was? That in pain you shall bring forth children. And this woman here, she is in labor and in pain, trying to give birth. Verse 5, she bore a male child who was to rule all the nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to heaven, up to God and his throne. And it says the woman fled into the wilderness. Okay, now we're going to keep going. The dragon was cast out. It talks about he was cast to the earth. And it says in verse 10, then I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Messiah have come. For the accuser of our brethren who accused them before our God day and night has been cast down. And it says in verse 11, and they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of the testimony, and that they did not love their lives to death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you, having great wrath. Now let's read verse 13. Now the dragon saw that he had been cast to the earth, so he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place and be nourished for a time and a half time. Okay? Let's see here. Where is... All right, wait, I think I missed it somewhere here. All right, you guys help me find this. In these first 16 or 17 verses, it mentions it says the seed of the woman, right? Verse 17. Oh, I didn't go long enough. All right, here we go. Verse 17. And the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her seed, if you're reading in King James. And who are this? All right, verse 17. This is the verse I've been looking for. And the dragon, meaning Satan, was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her seed, or her offspring. And who are the seed of the woman? Those who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Yeshua Messiah. That's the seed of the woman. And it says the seed of the woman's seed, this woman's offspring. And so Adonai, when he made that pronouncement in Genesis 3, that there would be enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, what he meant was that there's going to be enmity between the seed of the woman, meaning those who are saved, the children of God, and those who are not saved, the seed of the serpent. And that's why Cain was a seed of the serpent. Ham was a seed of the serpent. Esau was a seed of the serpent. Okay? The Egyptians, the Canaanites, all the pagan nations, right? That's why all the nations over there in the Middle East are against the nation of Israel. And it all goes back to Genesis chapter 3. I'm going to put enmity between your seed, the seed of the woman, and the seed of the serpent. The seed of the serpent, as Revelation 12:17 tells us, are the seed of the woman is those who are in Messiah, those who are part of Israel. And so the seed of the serpent are those who are outside or not part of the kingdom. Okay? And that's what's going on over there in the Middle East right now. You have all those nations surrounding Israel. They are the seed of the serpent, and Israel is the seed of Adonai. All right? Now think about this whole idea. Jacob versus Esau, right? They're they're fraternal twins, right? They're of the same mother. And yet, remember Esau, his hatred was forever. He would not let go of his hatred. Think of the Japanese versus the Chinese. Do you guys know how much they still hate each other to this day? How many of you guys did? I don't know if they hate each other. The Japanese and the Chinese, and you can't tell me that they're not more physically related than blacks and whites, right? Right? They're from the Orient, right? And yet they hate each other. And and people talk about, on television and in the news, you hear about, race relations in America are so bad, and they are not the best. But I'm going to tell you something. Black folks and white folks get along better than Chinese and Japanese can get along together. What about South and North Korea? Right? Same seed, right? They're Koreans. South and North. They hate each other's guts. They literally hate each other's guts. Just like Jacob and Esau. Now, Jacob didn't have such a hatred for Esau, but Esau had a hatred for Jacob. It's this whole idea of enmity of the seed. The enmity of the seed. We see that played out not only in Israel versus all the other nations, but we also see it played out with the nations even to this day. Okay? How about pain in childbirth? There should be a space. In childbirth is not a word. There should be a space there. Pain in childbirth. Now I'm going to take that to a different level because you need to see this. Remember I told you that everything that you read in Genesis 3:15 through 17, you are going to see as the backdrop of all the stories. Now think of this. When we think of pain in childbirth, we're always thinking, okay, when the woman goes into labor, it's going to hurt. right? I mean, that's what we generally think of, and in pain shall you bring forth children. Okay, yes, so she's giving birth and it's going to hurt. But it goes much deeper than that, okay? The Bible is going to use that physical picture of a woman having pain. Why is she having pain? Because of trying to give birth to that child. Well, what he's going to do is he's going to show, what we're going to see is we're going to see many instances of women who suffer to have children. Now, the best example is Rebecca's pregnancy, right? So Rebecca, now we know that Rebecca knows the promise that her seed is supposed to become a multitude of nations, right? Remember when she left, Eliezer went and told her what was going on about the promise. And then remember when she was leaving, her family said, may you become a multitude of nations, right? So they knew the promise. She gets there, she gets married to Isaac. And guess what? How long was she barren? Pardon? 20 years. She's barren 20 years, right? And it was to the point where Isaac had to do what? He had to pray for her. Remember, that was one of the words. It says he pleaded with the Lord. And remember what she said? She said, if so, why am I thus? Okay? If so, why am I thus? What was she saying? I believe what she was saying is, look, God, if I'm supposed to become a multitude of nations, I left my family to come here to marry him. I know the plan. I'm supposed to have a multitude of nations. Descendants, I can't even have one child. If so, if it's true, if it's so that you've given me this promise that I'm supposed to, my seed is to become a multitude of nations, how come I can't even have one child? Okay. In other words, what I want to share with you is that this constant recurring scenario where a woman of God cannot have children is the pain of childbirth, as it were, operating in their lives because of the emotional pain that they had because they could not conceive. Okay. So yes, it was talking about the physical pain of a woman bringing forth a child, but what we see is, why is it that Sarah, right? Sarah and Abraham, right? They get a promise, and for 25 years she's barren, and they're past childbearing age, right? So the main promise is that your seed is going to become a multitude of nations, and what happens with Sarah? She can't have a child. So she had emotional pain as she waited and endured for Adonai to finally allow her to conceive. And then the next generation, it happens with Rebekah. And then it happens with Jacob to the wife who he loved. Remember Rachel? Rachel could not bear children. So this whole idea of in pain shall you bring forth children, it takes on a different nuance when we start talking about the matriarchs of the nation of Israel. All three of them had to endure the pain of a barren womb. And it all goes back to Genesis chapter 3. All right? Rachel's pregnancy, we talked about that. Hannah's pregnancy. Samson's mother's pregnancy. Remember that? She also, all of these women, remember Elizabeth's pregnancy in the New Testament. Remember Miriam or Mary's pregnancy in the New Testament. It was impossible for her to have a child. Why is it that all these great men of God and even our Messiah, why is it that their mothers had to suffer the pain of a barren womb? It's because there's enmity going on between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. He's doing everything that he can to prevent this nation, the nation of Adonai, from going forth. And it manifests itself today in abortion. Okay? It manifests itself today in abortion. That is the enemy trying to prevent the seed of the woman. And that's what he's doing. Abortion is all about abortion. The roots of abortion are Genesis chapter 3. In pain shall you bring forth children. And he is trying to keep that from happening as much as he can. Okay? All right. So I'm going to skip that. Now, and I want to look at one other prophetic thing here. Who was the first person to build a city? Genesis 4:16-17. Then Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod on the east of Eden. Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. And he built a city and called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. Okay? Now I want you to think about something. Do we not know and do we not realize that Cain is like the quintessential seed of the serpent? Right? Cain is the seed of the serpent. Abel is the seed of the woman. But Cain is the seed of the serpent. So the Bible is going to use Cain and his life to basically set the stage for what's evil and not good. Okay? Now remember, Cain, he said the ground is cursed because of you. So do you know the reason why Cain, he said, hey, I'm going to become a wanderer. I'm just going to be going from place to place on the earth. Remember, he said, my punishment is greater than I can bear. And we sit back and we think, you little crybaby. You're like, what? The earth is no longer going to, yield the seed to you, and you're like, you act like this is definitely. Remember, society was agrarian back then, right? So, in other words, Adonai's punishment is like you can plant as much seed as you want, right? You can get hybrid Monsanto seed, that's resistant to pests and everything else. Cain, you can go and get all sorts of genetically modified seed if you want to. You throw it in the ground because it went in the ground by your hand. It ain't coming up, right? So that's why Cain became a wanderer. Because he had to go find stuff that was growing out of the land. He couldn't just settle in one place, or he couldn't be a farmer, right? You guys follow me on that? He couldn't be a farmer. So he had to walk around and meander around, right? And just go see where he could find things growing of itself, right? Now, does that kind of add a little bit add a little bit of reason why Cain would be the first one to form a city? Think about that. He can't go and plant anywhere. He can't be a farmer. He can't live in southern Illinois, right? Nice and flat, grow acres and acres of corn. Corn as far as you can see, right? And you can see real far, right? He can't do it because the ground is not going to yield its seed for him. So guess what? He comes up with a bright idea, right? Hey, we're going to build ourselves a city because we can't grow anything. We'll just build a city and build buildings, and we'll just get all these people all crunched into the city, right? And then we'll have some farmers. We'll just have to buy food from them. I'm going to tell you something. This whole idea, and it goes right. See, I'm telling you, this book is prophetic. It tells you the end from the beginning. I'm telling you, these big sprawling cities and skyscrapers and all that, I don't care what you guys think. I don't care if you think I'm mad or crazy or whatever. They're not of God. That's not the way God wants. Remember the Tower of Babel? What did they say? They said, lest we be scattered, let's build this big, huge tower, right? Well, what did God told man to do? He didn't give man that many commandments. The Torah hadn't even come, right? God said what? Be fruitful and multiply and do what? Fill up the earth. Now, that's pretty simple, right? It's like 3 commandments. Be fruitful, multiply, fill up the earth. And they couldn't even do that. They're like, hey, lest we be scattered. In other words, lest we do what God tells us that we were supposed to do. Let's build this big tower. Boom. It was rebellion. Cain, it was rebellion. Cities are not of God. Now, I know that, I understand, blah, blah, blah. They're not of God. He didn't intend it to be that way. It's supposed to be an agrarian society. I know, industrial revolution, blah, 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 blah. right? But the father of big, sprawling cities where you cram a bunch of people in there and they all just walk like mind-numbed robots wanting to do like everybody else does, where the kids are all influencing the kids, right? Where they're all going to these schools with lots of kids in them and there's peer pressure and all of that. Why? It's because that was one of the ways that Satan wants to control people. Adonai always intended it for being an agrarian society. You have your own piece of land, you got your family, your relatives all around you. Industrial Revolution, I know how much good it's brought, but all right. So anyway, I'm going to get off that. So one of the reasons why I brought that out is because, do you remember looking at the election map? Did you guys see the election map by counties? All the folks that live out in the rural areas, on the land, it was a sea of what color? Red. But all the ones that were in the cities, what color were those? Now, I think that's pretty amazing. I think that's pretty amazing that it was Cain who decided to come up with cities. We know it's not of Adonai, and now when we have this election here, we see that it's the people out in the rural areas that voted for a particular person to get a particular agenda done. So I'll leave that at that. All right. So so what happened with today's Torah portion? Today's Torah portion, it brought back into focus the enmity between the seed, Jacob and Esau. Okay? It brought that back into focus. One of the main messages of the Haftarah reading today was that we're not supposed to despise God's calling in our lives. Okay? Remember, he got on the priests. This is what Adonai did. Remember in Malachi, he got on the priests. He said, look, you guys, you are despising. In other words, what happened in today's Torah portion? In today's Torah portion, we learned that Esau did what? He despised his birthright. I mean, God gave him this magnificent promise, right? It should have been to him anyway, because he was the firstborn. He despised his birthright. And so, and the same thing happened in the Torah portion. The priests were despising their birthright. They're like, let's just offer these lame, blind animals to God. Don't try to give him the best. We'll keep the best for ourselves. They despised their birthright, okay? God had a priestly calling for Israel. They were to be a light to the nations, okay? They were to be a light to the nations. And what I want to say today is that we have a calling also. We have a calling to be a priestly nation, a house of prayer for all nations. Remember Adonai said that? Remember that Israel is to be a house of prayer for all nations. Expanding Adonai's kingdom. And you know what? The Bible says that he chose through the foolishness of what was preaching to save those who believed. And so Adonai has commissioned us to be the ones who take his kingdom forward. Okay? And we don't want to despise that calling. We don't want to despise that. Okay? Hebrews chapter 12, verses 14 through 17. It says, pursue peace with all people and holiness, without which no one will see the Lord. Looking carefully, lest anyone fall short of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up cause trouble, and by this many become defiled. And notice what he says here. This is connected to our Torah portion. Lest there be any fornicator or profane person like Esau, who for one morsel of food sold his birthright. Okay? For one morsel of food sold his birthright. And he gave it all up just because he was hungry. He was hungry, right? And the encouragement here that the writer of the book of Hebrews has given us, he's saying, don't do that. He's saying to us, he's encouraging us, do not do that. Do not give up our birthright as the children of God, as Yeshua's sheep, as his lambs, okay? As the seed of the woman, that we would not give up our birthright, that we would not allow the lust of the flesh to enter in and deter us from becoming what Adonai has called us. So he's given us a calling. Okay? He's given us a calling, and excuse me, right here. This is what I wanted to get to. Well, let me go back one page. Right here. Sorry. Ephesians chapter 1. Ephesians chapter 1, verses 1 through 4 is a beautiful illustration where Paul basically says, you know what? God's done this for you. He's done this for you. He's done this for you. He's done that for you. He's done this. As a matter of fact, let's read a couple of things. Because that would be better than just me saying he's done this for you. Notice what he says here in Ephesians chapter 1. It says, blessed be, verse 3, Ephesians 1:3, blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Yeshua Messiah, who has blessed us, notice what he says, with every spiritual blessing in the heavenly places in Messiah. Now look at what he's done. He chose us. Okay, he chose us. We didn't choose him. I wasn't choosing Adonai. I wasn't trying to follow Adonai back before I was saved. Right? I was going in the opposite direction. He chose us in him before the foundation of the world. Why? Why? That we should be holy and without blame before him in love. And he predestined us to be adopted as his sons and daughters by Yeshua Messiah, according to the good pleasure of his will. Notice what it says. It says, in him we have what? Redemption through his blood. Now, the rest of Ephesians 1, 2, 3, 4, it's going to tell us all of these benefits, all of the things that Adonai has done for us. We have redemption through his blood. We have forgiveness of sins, right? He made known the mystery of his will to us. And it goes on, we're seated in heavenly places in Messiah, right? We believed and we were sealed, verse 13, with the Holy Spirit of promise. And he goes on and on and on. He says that God has given us all these things and all these things. But what he does in Ephesians 1, 4 through 16, is he basically says, God has done this for you, he's done that, and he's done that, and he's done that. But the question is, why did he do it? And we've talked about it before. And it goes back to the heart of why we said we started Beta Israel Hebraic Community. In verse 4, Ephesians 4, starting in verse 12. For the equipping of the saints, for the work of ministry, for the edifying of the body of Christ, till we all come into the unity of the faith and the knowledge of the Son of God, unto a perfect man, into the measure of the stature of the fullness of Messiah, that we should no longer be tossed to and fro, carried about with every wind of doctrine by the trickery of men and the cunning craftiness of deceitful plotting, but speaking the truth in love may grow up in all things into him who is the head, Messiah, from whom the whole body, joined and knitted together by what every joint supplies, according to the effective working by which every part does its share, causes growth of the body for the edifying of itself in love. Okay? We are to be brought to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Messiah. That's so in Ephesians 1, 4 through 16, it's all about all of the good things that he's done for us. And then in Ephesians 4, 17 through 6, 24, it's all these practical commandments about how we can get there, like love one another, bear one another's burdens, pray for one another, etc., etc. So what I want to do is I want to end this by saying that we, like Esau, and this is the connection here, we don't want to despise our calling. We don't want to despise our calling. We want to see Adonai's will fulfilled in our lives. His will is that we become the very nature of Yeshua. His will is that we go from spiritual babes into maturity. Okay, that we would be brought to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Messiah. That's the vision that Adonai, that's the reason why he saved us. Okay? That's the purpose. And so, to the extent that we do not allow him to work in our lives, to the extent that we do not allow him to work in our lives, we are despising our calling. We don't want to do that because that's what Esau did. So I just want to remind everyone of what our vision is. Our desire is to be a light to the nations and future generations. Okay? That's it in a nutshell. We want to be a light. Just as you prayed earlier today, that we be an example. That's what Adonai wants for us. So that's what our vision is. Our vision, when we started Beit Israel, we were like, okay, well, what is our vision going to be? And we said, well, we want our vision to be what his vision is, right? We don't want to come up, because when you come up with your own vision, that's when people get sidetracked, right? When your thing is, the gifts of the Holy Spirit and speaking in tongues, that's your thing, right? Or your thing is, wrestling snakes, right? So every Sunday, the big thing is taking snakes out, right? Right, because you don't have the right vision, right? You can get off into all sorts of things. If your thing becomes just worship in and of itself, then, you're just going to have a big rock concert, but no hearts are going to be touched, right? Or if it's just a social gospel, you're just going to be going out and you're going to be doing all sorts of works for the lost, and you're never going to tell them how to get saved. So there's all sorts of visions that for people to have, and so ours was that. We don't think we're special or anything. That's not what I'm saying. I hope I don't sound that way. But the point is that we wanted to have a vision that was God's vision. So our desire is to be a light to the nations and future generations. How? By revealing Yeshua as Messiah through a Torah-observant lifestyle. Okay? So that's the vision. Being a light, revealing Him to the world. How are we going to do it? That's our mission. It's to build a community in which God's righteous ways are faithfully encouraged. A community in which His ways are faithfully encouraged, first, lived out, second, and passed on to the next generation, third. Passed on to the next generation by allowing Yeshua to live through us and helping each other to develop His life in us. Okay? It's a mouthful. It's basically a combination of a number of scriptures, right? To build a community in which God's righteous ways are faithfully encouraged and lived out and passed on to the next generation by allowing Yeshua to live through us. We want to allow Him to live through us, and then we also want to help each other develop His life in us. And so that's our mission, and that's what we don't want to despise. Hallelujah. We don't want to despise that as Esau did. Amen. Father, in Yeshua's name, we thank You for Your goodness, Your kindness, Your love, and Your mercy. And we just thank You, Adonai, for Your scriptures. We thank You for these stories. We just ask, Father, in Yeshua's name, that You would continue to open our eyes to the scriptures. I ask that today, Father, that we will have seen the scriptures in a way that maybe we hadn't seen them before, and that You would just continue to show us, Lord, that You have a very simple message, and we can go to those first few chapters of the Bible and allow those first few chapters of the Bible to be the prism through which we can see the rest of Your scriptures. We just ask, Father, in Yeshua's name, that You would continue to work within our lives. We thank You for the prayers that we offer today as a body in the mighty name of Yeshua. We just ask in Yeshua's name that You would bless us and allow us to fulfill the vision that You've given for us. In Yeshua's name, amen. Amen. Hallelujah.